Pam Bondi was mocked, dismissed, and challenged to prove herself on stage. What happened next completely changed the narrative and humbled everyone watching. No one expected this podcast episode to go viral. The guest? Jackson Weller, a sharp-tongued indie rock musician from Portland known for his progressive views, was midway through a story about performing at a fundraiser when the host casually asked if he had ever run into anyone from politics backstage. Jackson chuckled, took a sip of his drink, and leaned into the MIC Pam Bondi was at one of those events, he said with a smirk. Nice lady, I guess, but come on. She looked at the grand piano like it was IKEA furniture. I doubt she can tell middle C from a cup of coffee. The room erupted in laughter. It was the kind of line that landed well with his usual crowd, young, left-leaning, and skeptical of anyone with political background. Jackson was known for these offhand jabs, and most people did not take him too seriously. But this time, it stuck. Clips of that moment spread across social media within hours. The quote, trimmed, looped, and turned into memes, circulated with captions like Jackson drags Pam Bondi with a musical burn and Pam, do you even know what a piano is? She did not respond. Not then. In Tampa, Pam was sitting at her kitchen counter when her phone buzzed. Her niece had sent her the clip with a crying laugh emoji. Pam watched it once, then again. She did not flinch or roll her eyes. She just sighed, calmly closed the video, and slid the phone face down. Her tea had gone cold, but she did not delete the clip. Jackson was not done. A week later, he mentioned her again, this time in an interview with a Seattle-based online magazine. I guess she's lawyer smart. Sure, but I doubt she's got a creative bone in her body, he said. You can't fake art. Never stopped loving music, but she stopped playing. Courtrooms replaced concert halls, and legal briefs took the place of sheet music. The piano gathered dust. Now, decades later, that silence was breaking. Pam practiced in secret, late at night when the house was quiet. She relearned old pieces, working through the stiffness in her hands. At first, it was frustrating. Her fingers stumbled over passages she once played effortlessly, but muscle memory slowly returned. She was not trying to prove anything. She just wanted to feel the music again. Meanwhile, Jackson was oblivious. He continued making light-hearted digs in interviews, assuming the controversy had passed. To him, it was just another joke in a long list of irreverent remarks. But the night of the Sarasota charity event was approaching, and the stage was set for something he never expected. The evening was elegant, filled with donors, artists, and high-profile guests. Jackson arrived confident, ready to perform. He spotted Pam in the audience, but thought nothing of it. She was just another attendee. Then, midway through the event, the host made an unexpected announcement. A special guest had agreed to perform. A quiet murmur ran through the room as Pam Bondi stood up and walked toward the grand piano at center stage. Jackson froze. She did not say a word. She simply adjusted the bench, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but quickly grew in strength and confidence. It was Chopin. Not an easy beginner's piece, not a simple melody, but a composition that required depth, skill, and years of dedication. The room, once filled with casual chatter and clinking glasses, fell silent. Jackson watched, expression unreadable. The same woman he had mocked for not knowing middle C was now commanding the room, without a single word. As she played the final notes, she let them linger, allowing the music to settle. Then, without looking at anyone in particular, she stood, gave a small nod, and returned to her seat. No speeches, no explanations, just music. The applause started hesitantly, then grew into something undeniable. Some people stood. Others simply stayed, processing what they had just witnessed. Jackson swallowed hard, suddenly aware that the joke had come full circle. For a moment, the smirk on his face flickered, just briefly, before he recovered. Come on, he said, still trying to keep it playful. It's just a bit of fun. Pam didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle. Then, she set down her glass, smoothed the fabric of her dress, and, without another word, walked toward the piano. The room quieted. People turned, their conversations fading into whispers as they realized something unexpected was about to happen. Even Jackson, still holding his drink, found himself watching instead of speaking. Pam sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She took a breath, closed her eyes for just a second, then began to play. The opening notes of Asterisk Claire de Lune Asterisk floated through the ballroom, delicate yet full, weaving effortlessly through the air. The sound was rich, practiced, intentional. This was not someone fumbling through an old childhood hobby. This was a musician. Jackson's smirk disappeared entirely. The melody unfolded, each phrase building on the last, each note placed with the precision of someone who had lived with this music for years. And she had. Every measure carried the weight of late nights, of memories tucked away but never truly forgotten. The audience was still. Phones hovered in hands, but no one dared to break the moment with a flash. Pam didn't look at anyone as she played. She wasn't here for their approval. She wasn't here for Jackson. She was here for the music. The same music that had once been her refuge, the same music she had walked away from but never really left behind. When the final note faded, the silence stretched again, this time not from discomfort, but awe. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, scattered at first, then growing, swelling into something undeniable. A standing ovation. Pam stood, nodded once, then walked back to her seat. She didn't look at Jackson as she passed him. She didn't have to. He just stood there, stunned, with nothing clever left to say. Pam Bondi was mocked, dismissed, and challenged to prove herself on stage. What happened next turned the moment upside down and left everyone watching in silence. No one saw it coming. The podcast episode was never supposed to be a big deal. The guest, Jackson Weller, an indie rock musician from Portland known for his sharp tongue and progressive views, was in the middle of a casual story about playing a fundraiser when the host threw out a question. Ever run into anyone from politics backstage? Jackson chuckled, took a sip of his drink, and leaned into the MSE. Pam Bondi was at one of those events, he said with a smirk. Nice lady, I guess. But come on. She looked at the grand piano like it was an IKEA coffee table. I doubt she knows middle-of-the-room laughed. His audience, young and left-leaning, loved these kinds of offhand jabs. Most didn't take them too seriously. But this time, the joke stuck. Within hours, clips of that moment flooded social media, trimmed and looped into viral sound bites. Memes popped up with captions like, Jackson drags Pam Bondi with a musical burn, and Pam, do you even know what a piano is? Pam didn't respond. At least, not right away. Sitting at her kitchen counter in Tampa, she watched the clip her niece had sent, the message punctuated with a crying love emoji. She played it once, then again, and again. She didn't flinch, didn't roll her eyes. Just sighed, closed the video, and set her phone down. Her tea had gone cold. But she didn't delete the clip. Jackson, meanwhile, kept the joke going. A week later, in an interview with a Seattle magazine, he doubled down. She's lawyer smart, sure, he said, but I doubt she's got a creative bone in her body. You can't fake art. That quote made it worse. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was something sharper, more personal. Some fans laughed it off. Others shifted uncomfortably. A few longtime followers commented things like, is this really necessary? And just play music, man. But Jackson didn't notice. Or didn't care. He had a Florida tour coming up. He figured the noise would die down. What he didn't know was that Pam had just accepted a last-minute invite to a high-profile charity gala in Sarasota, a music and arts fundraiser for kids. The very same event Jackson was scheduled to perform at. Pam had no plans to take the stage. She wasn't there to speak, just to donate, sit quietly, and support from the sidelines. She hadn't played publicly in over 15 years. But something was shifting. Later that week, she stepped into her guest room, pulled the old sheet off her upright piano, and ran her fingers over the keys. It was out of tune, stiff with time. She smiled to herself. Then she picked up her phone. Hey, Dan, she said, calling her old music instructor from law school, still tuning pianos. Jackson had no idea she was practicing nearly every night. No clue she'd already chosen her piece. No thought that she wasn't coming to talk. She was coming to play. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom shimmered under soft lights, glasses clinking over quiet conversation. It was a charity event, but also a high-profile gathering of Florida's elite, politicians, celebrities, philanthropists. And near center stage, waiting to be acknowledged, sat a Steinway grand piano. Pam arrived just after 7:15, dressed simply in black satin, with no press, no entourage. Jackson was already in performance mode, chatting up journalists, laughing with industry friends. He didn't notice her at first. Then, between speeches and past trays of mini crab cakes, he spotted her. He didn't hesitate. Well, he said, raising his glass. The legend herself. Pam toned, expression unreadable. Jackson, she said with polite nod, didn't know art fundraisers were your thing. They are, she replied, especially when kids benefit. He smirked. Right. Music education and all that. So, any closer to telling the difference between a Steinway and a side table? Few nervous laughs. Pam just looked at him. Do you always talk like this at charity events? He shrugged, just keeping it light. Besides, you've got a sense of humor, right? She paused. Sometimes. That could have been the end of it. But Jackson, fueled by wine and ego, wasn't done. He gestured toward the grand piano. How about it? He said, voice casual but baiting. Want to prove me wrong? Play something. Anything. The air changed. Conversation quieted. A photographer lowered his camera. Even the woman managing the silent auction stopped typing. Pam glanced at the piano, then back at Jackson. I don't play for people who want me to fail, she said softly. Then, after a beat, but I will play for the kids. She walked past him, toward the stage. No dramatics. Just quiet certainty. Jackson blinked, caught off guard. He thought she'd laugh it off. Thought she'd brush past it. Instead, she was at the piano, speaking to the sound technician. A hush fell over the room. She Saturday, adjusted the bench, rested her hands in her lap. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge Jackson. She took a breath, closed her eyes and played. The first notes of asterisk Claire de Lune asterisk floated through the room, soft as water slipping through fingers. Some thought the sound system had kicked in, that maybe it was a track. Then they saw her hands move. This wasn't a parlor trick. It was practice, patient, and heartbreakingly real. Jackson stood frozen, arms crossed, mouth slightly open. He didn't recognize the piece at first, but he knew the feeling, melancholy, rising and falling like memory itself. She played with intention, not to impress, not to prove anything, just to speak in the only language that mattered. By the time the last note faded into silence, no one moved. Then, applause. Not polite, not forced. It swelled from the center of the room, rising to a standing ovation. Pam didn't bow, didn't smile, just returned to her seat and sipped her seltzer. Jackson didn't approach her. Not yet. He just stood there, a hand on his chin, feeling something he hadn't in years. Humbled, later, when he got on stage for his set, he adjusted his guitar strap, tapped the MIC, and exhaled, "I'm changing the set list," he said. A few chuckles. He didn't smile. When I was younger, I thought I could size people up quick. Thought I knew who had talent, depth, heart. He paused, then looked toward Pam. Turns out, I've been pretty arrogant. He played, stripped down, no effects, just chords and a voice raw with honesty. Pam didn't clap. She just listened. And that was enough. By morning, videos of her performance had gone viral. Headlines exploded. Pam Bondi just silenced the room with Debussy. Twitter debated whether it was a PR stunt or raw, undeniable talent. Pam ignored the noise. She went home, fed her dog, watered her plants. Declined interviews. But she did answer one email. A message from a 16-year-old girl in Arizona. I'm not into politics, but I've been scared to sign up for piano because I'm not very good yet. After watching you, I think I'll try. Pam stared at the screen for a long time before typing 2 lines back. Thank you. And remember, the key is not to be perfect. It's to play. That night, Jackson did post something. It wasn't flashy, just a photo of a blank notebook, his guitar resting beside it, and a caption. Asterisk starting over asterisk. He lost a few followers who called him soft. Gained a few more who thanked him for showing humility. But the biggest shift wasn't online. It was in him. A few weeks later, he performed at a small theater in Pensacola. Nothing fancy. No band. Just him, a stool, and his guitar. Midway through the show, he paused. "I learned something recently," he told the audience. "Sometimes we're so busy trying to tear down people we disagree with, we forget they are whole human beings. And sometimes they've got more to say than we ever gave them credit for." Then he did something no one expected. He sat at the venue's old upright piano, cracked his knuckles, and played Asterisk Claire de Lune do Asterisk badly. Really badly. He stopped after a few bars and laughed. Okay, I'm no Pam," he said, grinning. The audience erupted. And in that moment, something real happened. A wall came down, not just between two people, but between noise and meaning. Between mockery and grace. By the end of the week, the clip had reached national outlets. CBS News, Rolling Stone, even a brief mention on Asterisk, The Tonight Show. Asterisk, not because Pam Bondi was trending as a politician, but because someone unexpected had shattered the public's assumptions without saying a single word. The algorithms loved it. So did the people. It wasn't just about music. It was about being wrong loudly and then being corrected quietly, with dignity. One of the most shared comments under the video came from a middle-aged man in Iowa. "I've disagreed with her on almost everything, but that was stunning. I feel small for ever thinking she was just a headline." Another from a 22-year-old in Los Angeles. "It wasn't about right or left in that moment. It was about seeing someone fully for the first time." That's what stuck. The realization that we all reduce people, especially public figures, to whatever fits our beliefs. A soundbite, a party line, a tweet. But when Pam sat down at that piano, she reminded everyone that real people don't fit in tweets. Even Jackson's fan base, who had originally laughed along with his piano jokes, turned the conversation around. A thread from one of his longtime listeners read, "Watched Jackson challenge her. Thought it'd be funny. But what she did, that wasn't just piano. That was years of something she carried, waiting to be released. We don't know half of what people are made of." Pam's name started trending in a different way. Not as a politician, but as a person. A woman who had been underestimated, mocked, and then calmly reminded the world of her depth without ever clapping back. She didn't comment publicly. Her silence spoke louder than any press release. Jackson, for his part, kept things low-key. No official statement. No interview. But he did share a second post that week. A photo of an old upright piano in a small studio room. Caption, Asterisk lessons resume Monday. Asterisk, he had enrolled in private lessons in Gainesville. Said he was tired of pretending he knew it all. Some called it PR cleanup. Others saw it for what it was. Growth. What no one could deny was that something had shifted. And not just in Jackson or Pam, but in how people talked about them. For a few days, the online world stopped shouting and started listening. Clips from the Sarasota event kept surfacing. Someone uploaded the full 8-minute video of Pam's performance. In it, you could see every detail. The way she took a breath before beginning. The stillness in her hands between movements. The crowd's subtle transformation from amused to moved. A YouTube comment said it best. This wasn't a gotcha moment. It was a moment of grace in a world full of noise. And that's why it resonated. Because it wasn't about politics. It wasn't even about talent. It was about how wrong we can be when we assume people are only what we've heard about them. Pam didn't trend for yelling. She didn't trend for tearing anyone down. She trended because she showed up, stayed calm, and did the one thing nobody expected. She spoke through beauty, and beauty, real beauty, doesn't argue. It doesn't defend itself. To IT just as back in Tampa. Pam's piano was tuned now. Cleaner, warmer. She played in the evenings again. Not for anyone else. Just for herself. Sometimes just a scale. Sometimes the same 3 bars over and over. No need for applause or no audience. It had never been about proving anything. But in that moment, she reminded everyone watching of a truth they had forgotten. People are always more than the sum of their headlines. Stories like this only last if we carry them forward. And the final lesson hadn't been spoken just yet. It would have been easy to write it off as a fluke. Just another viral moment that came and went like all the others. But this one stuck. It kept getting shared. Not just because Pam played beautifully, but because the moment felt honest. And honesty is rare, especially when it shows up unannounced. For a while, it sparked a real conversation online. About judgment, about ego, about how easy it is to dismiss someone without ever knowing who they really are. Everyone had their version of the story. Political, musical, emotional. But no matter which angle people came from, the takeaway was the same. We assume too much, listen too little, and forget that everyone is carrying something they don't talk about. Pam's years at the piano weren't about showing off. They were about process, escape, peace. The fact that she never once brought it up, even when she was mocked on national platforms, wasn't modesty. It was restraint, self-respect, knowing who you are so deeply that you don't need to prove it every time someone throws a stone. There's strength in that. On the flip side, Jackson's journey was just as real. He could have doubled down, posted something snarky, kept the joke going. A lot of people in his position would have, but he didn't. He listened. He watched. And when it became clear he had misjudged someone, he let himself feel that. Not publicly, not perfectly, but clearly. That kind of shift doesn't get millions of views. It doesn't make headlines. But it matters, because that's how we change. Quietly, slowly, one layer at a time. Weeks later, Pam got a letter. Not an email. A real letter. Handwritten, in blocky cursive. It was from a middle school music teacher in rural Tennessee. I showed the video to my class. They were stunned, not just by the music, but by what it meant. I asked them afterward what they took from it. One kid said, "She didn't yell. She just played." That's going to stick with them. Honestly, it stuck with me too. Pam folded the letter neatly and placed it inside a drawer near her piano. She never replied. She didn't need to. That moment in Sarasota was never about fame or redemption. It wasn't a political stunt. It wasn't even about proving someone wrong. It was about showing what it looks like when someone knows exactly who they are and doesn't let noise, mockery, or public opinion shake that foundation. There's a lesson in that for all of us. We live in a time where calling people out has become sport, where assumptions go viral faster than facts, where it's easier to shout into a void than to pause and wonder what someone's life might actually look like off camera. But that night reminded people of something we're starving for: depth, grace, surprise, humanity. You don't have to like someone to recognize their talent. You don't have to agree with someone to acknowledge their worth. And you don't have to clap back when you can simply let your actions speak louder than your critics. Pam never asked for applause. She just played. Maybe that's a real lesson here. Don't speak unless it adds value. Don't fight unless it matters. And never assume you know someone just because you've seen their name on TV. Because one day, you might find yourself in a room, thinking you're the one in control, only to watch someone you underestimated sit down at a piano and change the temperature of the entire world around you. Without raising their voice, without asking for permission, just by being exactly who they are. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reconsider someone you may have judged too. Quickly, maybe it's time to see them in a new light. And if you're hesitating to share, maybe now is a moment to do it anyway. Real moments like these deserve to be remembered,